Hello again. Fighting continues to rage in eastern Ukraine as Russia tries to gain control of more of the Donbas region. But Russian forces are facing strong resistance from the Ukrainian military, with the conflict now entering its fourth month. My colleague and the host of this show, The Heat, Anand Naidoo, talked recently with the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko. He served from 2014 to 2019, and also got a response from Sergei Markov, a former public spokesman for Russian President Vladimir Putin. We begin with the Poroshenko discussion.
President Putin has said that his goals in this conflict is to demilitarize Ukraine, to denazify Ukraine, as he put it, and to seek a neutral Ukraine, one that would not seek membership of NATO. Is there any basis for negotiations with those demands from the Russians?
I think we do a lot already for demilitarize Russia, for denazify Russia, and to push on Putin to sit at the table of negotiation. For the table of negotiation, this is a very simple message. I was the president of Ukraine for the 5 years, and I have a negotiation many times with Putin. And the position is very simple. First stage, without any precondition, ceasefire, releasing all the hostages and prisoners of war, and withdrawal of the Russian troops and creating the humanitarian corridor. Nothing more. And immediately when it happened, the ceasefire, unconditional, we are ready to discuss security question separately. We would be happy to give any form of guarantee of security for Russia. And we are ready to receive security guarantee for Ukraine in the form of the membership in NATO. Very simple. But unfortunately, situation is different.
Right.
And, just last phrase.
Yeah.
But I insist that there is no any compromise by the territory. And I think that China knows that exactly what I mean, because I very much appreciate the absolutely firm position of China for the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine.
Right. Do you accept that Russia has security concerns? If you look at the Americans, and given their history over the past 70 years, doesn't President Putin have valid security concerns?
Look, you should understand that we and Putin, unfortunately, and I have additional evidence of that, after the so-called Victory Day and Putin speech, we are in different universe. Putin said that the NATO is dangerous for him, and he fight now not with the Ukrainian battalion or Ukrainian armed forces. He said that he fight here with NATO in his universe. But NATO never attack anybody. NATO is a peace. Russia is a war. Very simple, black and white. And Mariupol, this is the picture which Russia want to demonstrate to the world what is in their imagination, Russian world. The picture how world see now Mariupol, this is the way how...
Right, can I just stop you there? When you say NATO is for peace, how does one then explain that NATO has been engaged in regime change operations in Libya, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan?
First of all, this is not a NATO operation. Second, if you read very much attentively the North Atlantic Treaty, you will see that that creates only for defense, not for offensive operation.
Well, those were...
I cannot comment if any NATO member states to provide this operation. They have nothing to do with NATO. And this is the narrative which want to distribute that. And I think that after the Russia start to be aggressor, Russia destroy all post-war security system, which was based on the Security Council of United Nations. But frankly speaking, I'm not prepared to speak about Liberia or any other state. I speak for Ukraine. And just for your viewers, Ukraine is not Afghanistan. Ukraine is a 1,000-year history, European countries with European values and with a very high level of responsibility. And this is, I said to you, the 5th president of Ukraine. We Ukrainians never, ever violate international law. We never, ever attack one single square meter of the Russian land. We do not give any reason to attack, and we never give up. And just for your information, the last argument, in the beginning of 90s, Ukraine was the only nation who voluntarily gave up the 3rd biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, and receiving in return the security guarantee from Russia, from United States, from Great Britain, from France, and from China.
You were defeated by President Zelensky in the last election. What do you make of his handling of the crisis so far?
I'm not defeated. I was the only Ukrainian president who organized democratic election. And this is absolutely new feature. I'm the only Ukrainian president who make a European civilized transfer of power. And this has definitely never happened before. And I'm proud of that. And today, definitely, Putin wanted that Ukraine undermine the unity of our nation. But we have a relationship of the government and opposition. On the 23rd of February, I was the leader of the opposition with a very huge support of the people. But on the 24th, we met with Zelensky. We said we have one enemy, and the name of this enemy is Putin. And we are united. And until the war will be, we will keep the unity. And the second, we will keep the unity and solidarity of the whole world with Ukraine. And I'm very much appreciative for that.
Mr. Poroshenko, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
And for a Russian perspective, I'm joined now from Moscow by Sergei Markov. He is a former public spokesman for President Vladimir Putin, and he's a former member of Russia's State Duma. Mr. Markov, thanks for joining us. The former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says the basis for a negotiated end to this conflict would be the release of all prisoners, a ceasefire, a humanitarian corridor, and the withdrawal of all Russian troops from Ukraine. He also pointed out that there would be no compromise on territory whatsoever. Are any or all of those conditions acceptable to Russia to end this?
First of all, Ukraine as an independent country doesn't exist. It's under the control of the United States of America and Great Britain. And both Ukrainian President Poroshenko and Zelensky are the puppets in the hand of United States intelligence service officers. And it's proxy war of United States and Great Britain against Russia. And both Poroshenko and Zelensky just follow the orders to fight against Russia. The Russian conditions for the peace is very clear. Stop making anti-Russia from Ukraine by method of terror, which is used as main political method of the Kiev repressive, undemocratic, and illegal regime, which we have now in Ukraine. So it also means practically all political prisoners, there are sound of them, should be immediately liberated. Dmitry Zhangirov knows this name. He's a very good friend of mine, and he captured, and now he stays in the Kiev prison under the torture. They liberate Dmitry Zhangirov immediately. And a brother of Alexei Tsarev, for example, had been captured 2 days ago, as many thousand other Ukrainian citizens. Another, de-Russification of Ukraine should be stopped. It means that Russian language should be recognized as official second language of Ukraine. You should take into account that Russian language is used by 70% of Ukrainian citizens. It's also a very good example that Kiev regime is not democratic, because can you imagine that people can democratically to support prohibition of their native language. Of course, that's
okay. Sergei, I just want to get back to some of the points you raised there. I mean, you say that the government in Kyiv is not a democratically elected government. It is. President Volodymyr Zelensky won 73% of the vote in that election that made him the president. And the other point I want to address is you say that Ukraine poses a threat, terror threats, you say, to Russia. Could you be more specific on that?
Yes, it's absolutely clear. Of course, Zelensky got 73%, but that doesn't matter. Kim Chen Il in South Korea got even more than Zelensky. The most important point that no one Ukrainian citizen who support idea of the close friendship between Russia and Ukraine have been not allowed to take part in Ukrainian presidential elections. Also, this election happened in situation of terror against those who support ideas that Russia and Ukraine is friendly brother countries. It's most important. For us, it doesn't matter who from American puppets, Poroshenko or Zelensky, will be elected. For us, free and fair elections is those elections where Ukrainian citizens who support ideas that Russia and Ukraine should be friendly allies has the right to take part in elections.
Okay.
Then about the threat.
Mr. Markov, you say that there are puppets in Kyiv. You also say that this is a proxy war. So what is Russia's plan to end this conflict?
The Russian plan is very easily. Russia will crush Ukrainian army. It's those part of Ukrainian army which follow criminal orders from Kyiv repressive illegal Russophobic regime. And those part of Ukrainian army who will not follow these criminal orders will be welcomed by Russia. And after crushing of Ukrainian army and liberation of the summer territories, we will allow people in of different regions of Ukraine to make the decision about their future. If they want to join Russia, it's okay. If they want to continue this to live in Ukraine, it's okay.
Okay, you say Russia will crush the Ukrainian army, but at the moment, Russia is occupying a small portion of Ukraine in the east and the south. Did Russia overestimate its ability to take on the Ukrainian army when it started this on February 24th?
When the war started, Russia underestimated the strength of the Ukrainian army. It's now absolutely clear. That's why first stage was not so much successful for Russian army. We believe that a big part of the Ukrainian army will be ready to arrest neo-Nazis such as Regiment Azov and Donbas and some other neo-Nazi military groups, and then they will make the peace deal with Russian army. It appeared to be it didn't happen because United States very strongly control Ukrainian army. Ukrainian army is very strong combination. It's a Russian soldier because 90% of Ukrainian army speak Russian language, led by fascist officer. Because United States organized Nazification of the officer corps of the Ukrainian army, and finally it's commanded by American generals, because Ukrainian generals, they have double citizenship, Ukrainian and American, and some of them British.
Okay, Sergei Markov, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And again, both those interviews were conducted recently by the show's host, Anand Naidoo. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we'll continue with more Russian and Ukrainian perspective. Please stay with us.
The nature of business is to bring value. Business activities in Europe, Asia, and the U.S. reach consumers globally. Trade, manufacturing, energy, high-tech, real estate, consumption. We give an expanded view on global business and how it covers, influences, or relates to the whole world. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to The Heat. I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anand Naidoo. We are talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we continue now with two very different views of the crisis. Joining us from Kiev is Petro Zalmayev. He is the director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. And from Providence, Rhode Island, also joining our discussion is Vladimir Golstein. He is chair of Slavic Studies at Brown University and a frequent commentator on Russian foreign policy. Welcome, both of you, to the show. Peter, I just want you to pick up, if you can, on what we just heard from the former Putin public spokesperson, essentially saying that Ukraine doesn't really exist as a country. Now, we've heard this a few times coming out of Moscow. What's your reaction to this?
Well, you know, in a way, what Mr. Markov said is refreshingly honest and brutally honest. You know, it makes our task here in Ukraine much simpler. We are fighting for our survival because, like Mr. Markov said, Russia does not believe in the existence of an independent Ukrainian state, period. Whatever he said about American and British influence, that's besides the point. As early as mid-2000s, at his meetings with President George W. Bush, Vladimir Putin said that, you know, George, Ukraine is not even a country. This is part of a Russian imperial thinking. They believe that Ukrainians have fooled themselves into thinking they're different from Russia, and the West has helped them in that. But they're really just Russian. And so they must be reunited with Mother Russia, if not through love, then by force. And so this is exactly what is happening. This is an old 19th century style war of conquest, you know, and Ukrainians know exactly what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their independence.
Vladimir, can we pick up on what Sergei Markov said in that statement before the break, that essentially Ukraine doesn't really exist as a country? What's the background to this? And is this something that obviously is going to get in the way of any move towards peace?
Well, I view it just an exchange of words. When people, like, you know, enter in the fight or something, there is like spinning and saying, and you're nobody, and you're nobody. I wouldn't take it seriously. I think definitely a lot of things would be decided either on diplomatic table or on the battlefield. But that type of talk, you know, it's primarily for inner consumption. What he wants to convey is probably, you know, two ideas.
But sorry to interrupt, Vladimir. Sorry to interrupt, but there is this sort of feeling, isn't there, going back, especially in Russia, that Ukraine and Russia are somehow the same place, going back to the sort of establishment of the Kievan Rus area and Moscow later on. Is this a sort of trope that is used in Russia to explain the actions, or do you think, as you just said, it's spin?
It's a spin because, you know, what we hear, definitely the history of these places are extremely interconnected, from Kiev and Rus, which was a foundation of the civilization, to the present. It's connected. I think what he wants to stress first and foremost, that Ukraine now is not that independent, not in terms of Russia or anything, but in terms of NATO. And I think that's the message which Russians want to convey to their own people, that Ukraine does represent its own interest, that they are now used as a proxy in the war of NATO against Russia. So that's what you're saying. Similar to that, Ukrainians like to under-stress and sort of underline that neither Russians nor Soviets did anything
I want to make a comment.
to Ukraine. And that's what sort of the argument is about. Like, you know, Ukrainians say, you didn't build anything, you didn't do anything for us, you only enslaved us. And Russians say, you know, so this is like a war of words, which I don't think we should pay too much attention to.
Vladimir, Peter very politely put his hand up, which never happens on the show, but he wants to respond. And Peter, can I just throw in another question there? Given your response, also, where is Kiev when it comes to hostilities? Because this really seems to be a sort of turning point in the conflict.
Well, let me just comment on what the previous speaker said about NATO. You know, well, extending that logic, let's say, to Finland. Finland was actually part of the Russian, you know, of Russia under the Tsars. And
that's right. There's a statue of Alexander III in Helsinki. Yeah.
Exactly. Stalin fought to keep it under its control, and Finns fought back very bravely, sort of like what Ukrainians are doing. And now Finland wants to be a member of NATO. So should Moscow now go to war with Finland using that same logic. I mean, why is it okay for Finland to become a member of NATO and not for Ukraine? The fact is precisely Russia's belligerence and hostility that has created the situation where Ukraine, Georgia, Sweden, and Finland want to become members of NATO. It's because of Russian behavior. That's very simple. When you said about the state of affairs, did you mean the state of war in Ukraine?
Yes, exactly.
Or can you just? Well, Ukraine is obviously expecting more and more shipments of Western weaponry in the days to come. Right now, we are pretty much stalemated with no particular side making a significant breakthrough, and yet, I've spoken with some military experts who think that there's a good chance that Ukraine may go on not just counterattacks, but on a serious counter-offensive across the board by mid-summer. And at any rate, it is expected that this hot phase of the war in the east of Ukraine can probably not last much longer past August or September. Both sides are really just getting worn out.
Before I bring Vladimir in, I mean, there has been reports, credible ones, of Russian advances. We saw, obviously, how Mariupol ended, and whether you count it in time or territory, Russia does seem to be concluding one of its war aims, which is sort of creating that land bridge in the south to Crimea, and also expanding its territory in the Donbas. So I understand where you're coming from, obviously, but it does look like the war may have turned a little bit. Is that an accurate assumption?
These are at best tactical breakthroughs. No significant breakthroughs outside of Mariupol. Obviously, the land bridge is pretty much going to be what Putin will want as a new status quo, and that's going to be up to Ukraine's ability to launch counteroffensives. Ukraine has shown no willingness to contemplate a new status quo as far as new land grabs, and so that's why we're saying that this has still ways to go and play out. Right now, Russia is stalemated elsewhere outside of this land bridge. It has not conquered a single major city outside of Kherson and Mariupol.
Well, let me bring in Vladimir here, because I don't know if you've noticed that we've seen quite a few Western editorials over the last 7 days. The New York Times, I saw one in the Atlantic magazine the other just in the last 24 hours or so, which is starting to sort of suggest that perhaps it's time to sit down and negotiate. We've seen peace offerings from Italy, French President Emmanuel Macron involved. Could you see Russia and Ukraine sitting down at a table, and what would a peace look like? Would it look like independence for the Donbas region? Would it look like Crimea goes forever? Obviously, Vladimir first, and Peter, I'm sure you're going to put your hand up again to add to this one.
Well, I think what is, they should have been sitting and negotiating long before. A lot of lives would have been saved, a lot of money would have been saved, but somehow encouraged by United States, by NATO, by England, Ukrainians got this idea into their head that they actually can push Russia back. And that's not going to happen. Russia have endless amount of weapons at their disposal, and at the end of the day, Ukraine will be smaller. No doubt about that. And the Russians are probably not going to give back Donbas. And Donbas for 8 years been bombarded by, Kiev regime. And instead of just somehow negotiating autonomy then and having a very nice cushy position in the center of Europe, trading with Russia, trading with Europe, Ukrainian decided to take this very belligerent position, blaming Russia for everything. And now they're going to end up with a smaller country. There's no doubt about that. And Russia definitely is not going to give neither Donbas, nor this land bridge to Crimea, nor the Crimea. So that's the reality, and that's how it's going to sort of play out.
Well, let me bring in Peter. But first of all, Peter, as you know, the Ukrainian president has been in Davos, Switzerland this week, and he shows no signs of sort of switching what he wants from the West from the very early days of the war. Let's just play a clip, and I want you to get your reaction off the bat.
The support to the country under attack is more valuable the sooner it is provided. Weapons, funding, political support, and sanctions against Russia.
Now, this has been obviously a repeated call, Peter, from President Zelensky for a long time. Are the weapons making a difference, or are we going to see, as Vladimir suggested, essentially Russia can go on forever? And let's face it, sometimes the West's attention isn't that long.
Well, that's true. But on the other hand, you know, what in commenting what the previous speaker said, you know, Russia has endless. It does seem to that it does have endless, you know, stores of ammunition and tanks. On the other hand, you know, it needs people to use the, you know, to fire those weapons and use those tanks. Right. And by all accounts, including Western intelligence, we hear Russians are demoralized. They really don't know what they're fighting for. Vladimir Putin has provided Russians with a bunch of cockamamie, ridiculous ideas about denazifying Ukraine with the Jewish president. It is pretty ridiculous. You know, the fascist country here is Russia. It's not Ukraine. And you know, they're all Russia on the scale of Umberto Eco has a scale of 14 signs of fascism, and Russia hits probably like 13 out of 40. Pardon me. And so, and when also the previous speaker said that, you know, Ukraine should have sat down at that table and negotiated with Russia. You know, it's sort of like saying, why did you fight back? We would have just, you know, taken, let's say, 30% of your territory. We would have taken Odessa, Nikolaev, Mariupol, and you should have just negotiated. Well, we would not have killed you. You know, the matter of fact, probably more Russians have been killed in this war than Ukrainians, simply because of the, you know, rules of war. Right, the attacking side always suffers higher rate of casualty.
Well, I mean, as you know, truth is usually the first casualty of war, and the numbers have been all over the place on this. But I want to end this by basically asking you both the same question. Peter, you can go first as you're up already. What does peace look like?
Peace looks like, in my mind, I would say at this point, let's roll the Russians back to February 24th borders before this latest invasion. So that means Crimea?
Does that mean independence? Does that mean nominal independence for Donbas, Luhansk, and Donetsk?
No formal recognition of independence, but sort of keeping it frozen till the next round of
sort of autonomy. I mean, autonomy for the east and Crimea firmly with Russia. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's something to be determined at a later stage.
And neutrality for Ukraine, not joining NATO.
That is a harder sell now. It could have been like, let's say, 3 months ago, earliest rounds of negotiations. I think Ukraine now sees its security only as a member of NATO.
Vladimir, can you pick up on that? Does that look what peace looks like from your end?
I agree with Peter in terms of NATO is going to be hard to sell, but I would also say that, you know, in this, what the Russians call liberated, you can call it occupied, whatever, this territory in Donbas and Kherson and Mariupol, there are a fair amount of Russian speakers who are actually happy with what's happened. And I wouldn't rush to say that only Russians are demoralized. I think it's just the opposite. We know support of Putin at the beginning of the campaign was 65%, now it's 80%, because a lot of Russians feel that the West is against them, using Ukraine as a weapon against them. So Russians are actually very much resolved. And Ukrainians, I'm not sure that much resolved, because they're dying, they're being sacrificed for the sake of what? Many of them know that a Kyiv regime is corrupt, is, you know, beholden to the Western interest. So it's, you know, I think that Crimea is not going back, Donbas is not going back, this corridor to Crimea is not going back. In terms of NATO, we'll have to see.
Okay, well, Vladimir, Peter, I want to thank you both for your kind of views and also the polite way you exchanged with each other despite the tenseness of the situation. Thanks so much for joining us. And that's it for another edition of The Heat. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.